AI is a foundation of our business, right? So like in terms of we're gearing towards more being a technology driven with people support type company. So for instance, we just launched an after hours AI bot that we're doing QA testing now on. And so we're using technology to supplement. So when we typically go in and bid on a project, we usually say, here's the service levels that we can hit and how much it's going to cost you to deliver on the quality that you want.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to the Small Business Mentor podcast, where we shine a light on the black holes of business growth with your host, Alan Pentz. In each episode, we explore the leaps and bounds entrepreneurs make as they push their businesses beyond the 1 million mark into the realm of professional sustainable growth. Stay with us as we navigate the journey from brute force to finesse.
Awesome. Today we have Ankit Patel on the Small Business Mentor podcast. He is the owner of My Business Core Team, and that is a outsourcing kind of offshoring business for optometry clinics. And he got into that by actually owning them. So he owns kind of more like a passive owner of Classic Vision Care, which is optometry clinics in the Atlanta area. And he's also just like all around the other person I know in this world that is super geeky about business concepts. And so he's even more than I am. So we're going to talk about his business, his businesses, and then get into a little bit of business kind of concepts that we learned through our EO group together. So Ankit, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here.
Hey, thanks for having me, Alan.
So first, let's get into your core business. Kind of give us a sense of, what you're doing, how you got into it, obviously through owning a clinic, and then we'll talk a little bit about the structure of that industry.
Yeah. So with optometry, so my background is actually in engineering, and I've worked in manufacturing and large healthcare systems, and then married my wife, who happens to be an optometrist. And one of the things that she wanted is a practice. And so when we got married, we found her a practice to buy, and I helped her start it up and get it going and realized, man, this is a good industry. So when we had our first child, I was consulting at the time. And so I wanted to get off the road and decided to buy a second practice. And I went full time in running the practices. We've acquired 5 total. We consolidated down to 2. And yeah, that's we've been doing it for about 12, 13 years now.
So give me an idea of like what this is, someone going in getting glasses prescription, eyeglass, contact prescription. What's the basic practice look like? You said it's a good business. So give us some details on that you can give us.
Yeah. So first, a couple of things. Ophthalmology and optometry are 2 different things. So sometimes people confuse the 2.
Yeah, I always say the wrong one, so I apologize.
That's okay. It's a normal thing. Ophthalmology basically is surgery, and optometry can do everything else for the most part. It's state to state how much they can do. But for the most part, anything not related to surgery, optometrists will take care of you. And as far as the business, it's really interesting because you can do vision exams, you can do medical exams, things like glaucoma, diabetes management, those type of things. Vision exams are like, hey, what's better, 1 or 2, right? Get a refraction, get your glasses prescription, get your contact lens prescription. Then there's also things like we actually do a lot of dry eye treatments. So we've actually got special equipment to address and fix dry eyes, which is another set. Some people are getting more into cosmetics as well now. So there's that line of business. And then like we mentioned, there's glasses sales, which is a whole retail business in itself. And then you have contact lens sales as well, which is a slightly retail/medical hybrid. So you've got almost like 5 different businesses in one. And that's why it makes it so interesting and so cool.
So what does a typical clinic look like? Like what kind of revenue / margin, whatever you can tell us?
Yeah, so it's a range. So it depends on your model. So there's different types of, so I'll talk to you in terms of the different types of models that are out there. There is a full private practice type practice, which is what we are. There are exam-only practices like a Costco. Technically, the doctor only owns the exam side and Costco owns the materials, like all the glasses and contacts come from Costco. There are franchisees like a Pearl Vision. Some of those are franchises. Then you have what you call like a buying group where technically the company owns, it's almost like a franchise. And Vision Source practices are those as well. So, but they're more like a private practice franchise. So there's a wide range of possibilities. Within all of those, you have a range of practice modalities. So there's everything from 100% medical only to 100% retail only. Usually the people on either extreme are specialized in something. So if you're 100% optical sales, usually that's not owned by a doctor, that's usually owned by an optician. It's like a really high-end retail experience. You go in and buy glasses, really fancy ones, really nice ones. And 100% medical are usually people who are geared just towards medical exams. They're in a population that needs that, or they might be like a Medicaid office. And so there's a range of different models there. From a revenue standpoint, it depends. From a profit standpoint, typically that also depends too on how big you are. A single owner office where the doctor's running the office and they're working the office, they can take up to 50% of revenues home. So, and that's a really good office that's taking 50%. They should be doing 30%. That's with their pay and with profits, is typically what you can expect.
Okay. So that's like SDE, seller's discretionary earnings kind of idea, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then if you're multi-site, multi-location, like any other business, right? The bigger you get, the closer to 10 to 15% is what you're looking at for a profit margin. But your take-home pay could be a range of that depending on how big you are. And so it just depends on your size and number of people, number of locations.
So it sounds like almost like a typical retail franchise model. You can make what, like $1 million or something out of $1 million to $2 million out of a location, depending on what you're doing. And then you take out like 10 to 15% of that. Is that sort of the rough numbers? Yeah.
Basically, yeah. And what I would say is by doctor efficiency. So one good doctor should be performing at 1.5 million in production.
Okay.
And that's a really good doctor. Most doctors they don't have the volume for that, or they don't do that. So there's a huge surge of people right around $300,000 in revenue, which honestly, for most doctors that run it themselves, one or two staff, you're taking home 150. That's pretty solid. So there's a lot of people there. Then you have a little bit of a no man's land. There's not as many between that 300 to a million, but there are some there. But they either tend to hit a glass ceiling and go back down, or just hover around 600, 700, or they can break through and go million plus. So that's sort of a no man's land. Then you have the million plus practices, which if they're doing it in one location, usually it's one doctor, maybe two or three. Just depends on what their model is, right? If they're more high end boutique, they could probably do it with one doctor. If they're a little bit more volume based, they may need two doctors to get that kind of production out. It just depends on how they do it. But again, the profit margins are roughly the same on both. It's just how hard the doctor works in those situations.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I would assume like staffing is an issue here. Like most doctors, do they want to own their own things? So like if you're trying to staff multiple clinics, I guess that would be a pretty big issue.
100%. That's actually the one of the biggest problems. It is a people business, right? It is a human connection business, at least the way we run it. I think there's a big push in medicine and some optometry spaces to just go volume, 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 5-minute exams, 10-minute exams, 15-minute exams, really fast exams, and more volume. And there's a place for that where certain types of situations. One of the reasons why I like optometry, because you can choose how you practice and what you want to refer out, what you want to keep in office and treat internally. And so we make those decisions based off of what we want, what we're really good at, and what's best for our patient care. And so we're not forced to see a lot of volume. We're able to space that out and really develop relationships with our patients.
My sense has always been these franchises, like it's all about selling you the contact lenses or the glasses, right? And the exam's like part of it, but man, they like hounded me last time I went to like a Pearl Vision. It was like, you got to buy this, you got to buy, it was like, so it seemed like that was a very important part of their revenue stream.
I think most of the pearls now are corporate owned. So which means that the doctor probably has the exam side and the corporate owns the production side, meaning the glasses side. That's why they have like really salespeople there. Our approach in a lot of private practices, this is why I like private practice, it's more consultative. So we would come in and figure out where your problems are, what your needs are, and create a custom prescription plan for you. And if you want to get it with us, we'll show you why we're probably better than the other options. And if you don't, that's okay too, right? And so kind of work with you on the consultative side. So more of a human connection. But because it's such a human connection, you're right. The people are so critical in our type of business.
Yeah. And then I would assume like just, like what you see with all these sort of med spas and other things, that aspect of the business must be like a growing piece of it, right? Probably, I would assume relatively high margin depending on who has to perform it.
It is, yeah.
So give us like cosmetic, like what is that? Is that like Botox or is it something different?
It's state to state. Every state's a little different what optometrists can do.
Okay.
In our state of Georgia, we can treat everything basically from here, which is the lip line up, and it has to be related to ocular issues. So if you have ocular rosacea, we can treat that around your face and your eyes. And so if there's an ocular issue associated with it, we can treat that. Now, there are side effects to some of the treatments, like removing wrinkles, right? So that's a side effect of one of the treatments we use to treat ocular rosacea and dry eyes, which happens to be a nice little side effect. So it's a little bit of cosmetic, but the primary, what we can say we do, has to be related to eye treatments.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so now let's transfer from the actual clinic to like what you've now been doing with your newer business.
My business care team, yeah, it's so the way it started was 2019. We had 4 locations at the time. We centralized our call center, and I saw other people doing this, having VAs in the Philippines. Like, you know what? I think I can do that too. And so we hired a couple of people out there and started doing support functions and phone support from someone in the Philippines. Fast forward, COVID hit early that following year. Not every one of my staff came back. I started supplementing and augmenting with people in the Philippines. And since then, we haven't looked back, right? And so we've been figuring out how to do the hiring, how to get people on board, train them. And then we've also, 2022, we started doing a friends and family, helping other people out with global resourcing. And then last year, we started rolling out my business care team as a full-fledged business, helping optometry and ophthalmology companies with staffing and global resourcing, both from back office tasks, and we help them a little bit in office as well too, like finding staff for their in office.
So are you doing like a managed service? Are you doing recruiting or both? Or
It's technically BPO for it. So what we do is you outsource your processes that you have for us. So we're really good at like phones, right? Everything inbound, outbound communication, back office tasks like insurance verification, billing, prep work for the day, and then billing, revenue management cycle, those type of things we're good at. From an in-office standpoint, we more service as a support function. For most of our clients, we don't actually charge them for the recruiting services. We put it as an add-on bonus for us because we know that the in-staff office is so critical. So we have it's a crazy process to get hired with our companies, but we have a really rigid, structured approach that really vets out and reduces the chance of a bad hire.
yeah, so it sounds like you're able to, and this is something I see in the offshoring outsourcing industry is, there's a lot of recruiting companies now, but I feel like that just becomes a commodity after a certain point, right? And what you've done is really, hey, I'm going to go give you the offshore resources, but we're going to create systems and processes and training so that they know how to run back office. And then you can spread that cost across a lot of different clinics, right?
And management, right? So that's the difference between like a BPO versus like a VA company. A VA, you get a body. A BPO, you're paying for metric delivery. So we measure productivity, quality, and service level in everything that we do.
Right. So, and if you're running like you're running 5-7 clinics to go hire all these people, figure out how to train them, it just seems like that's a huge distraction from running your business, right?
It's a lot. Yeah. I think at one point that we had more than this, but with the same amount of volume now, we had about 14 people. We can do with 6 in office now. And we're able to pay them more and give them better benefits and keep them there longer because we're able to take so much off their plate and do back office tasks.
Yeah. And I see this in the industry is changing, right? Well, I think it hasn't changed yet, but I think we will see it is there are a lot of models where people are providing VAs as a managed service and, they're paying them $800 and filling them out at $3,000 a month. And that just seems like that's destined to go away. And really getting into these niches and saying like, for me, I run a government contracting company. So like we have certain legal things too with the government. So how can you, if you could build a managed service that's like, hey, I can go into your back office and take out 30-40% of the cost, run it better. I'm running it on these standards, on these service level agreements. Like that just seems like a no-brainer in almost every industry. And then is worth paying the cost because it's very specialized, niche down to your industry, right?
In our industry, if you need one person as a support, we're not the best fit for you. Go get a VA, right? It's the best option. If you're looking to scale, you have multi locations, you have complexity, because the value that we bring, like you said, is that management side, is making sure we hire, we fire, we train, right? And we're just having like interaction, just here's how we're doing in performance. So it ends up being much easier for them to manage. And so that's where the advantage. And one of the things like you hit on the head, right? Having very specific industry knowledge and knowing how to solve the industry problems is sort of a big differentiator for us. We've had so many people come to us that have tried the VA companies that are pretty popular in the industry. And they're like, yeah, they just weren't cutting it. It's like, okay, well, our process enables us to go deeper and really solve their actual problem versus them having to try to figure out. Because we've been able to figure out some problems that folks in the industry have struggled with. So like staffing, division of labor, process efficiency gains and performance improvement.
So have you guys been able to look at stats and say like, hey, we're able to take this much cost out or able to get you this much more efficient? What does that look like?
Yeah. In general, there's labor cost as a percentage of revenue, and that's a common metric. And you break it out into doctor and non-doctor payroll. So non-doctor payroll all in should be 24% or less, depending on your company size. 24% I use because bigger companies typically are 24%, and which is our target audience, multi-location, bigger companies. And if you're higher than that, there's opportunity to bring that down.
And that's what the BPO solution can do? Or is it able to undercut that metric or what?
Well, the idea is that what we do is we basically say, you're paying someone for front desk or back office admin tasks, you're paying them $15, $18 an hour. Our equivalent for management and everything ends up being about, anywhere from $8 to $12 an hour or less, usually closer to $8 to $9. And the reason, so that becomes a very easy arbitrage conversation, right? It's like,
so that's 40 or 50% cost savings, or 30 to 50, depending, what you're paying right now.
It can be, right? Yeah. And so since we're taking out the management, we take out that service. And so we just got to deliver at a high level. And so it becomes a very easy calculation for them. And they also say like, well, I don't have to worry about the management side, which is part of that equation. It's like, I'm there, right? That's easy for me because I can grow my business and scale it.
So you're saying the benchmark in your industry for a larger organization is, without doing any offshoring or outsourcing, is 24% non-doctor staff costs, right?
Yeah.
So are you able to bring that percentage down then?
If they give us enough of the work, yes. In our office.
Yeah, like what did you get?
We get down to 20 to 22%, depending on the time of the year and all that.
You can put 4% onto the bottom line, basically.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So, and then there's another metric that's important in the industry. Your cost of goods plus your total labor should be around 60% or less.
Okay.
And so that's ultimately the metric that you should look at. So like I mentioned before, there are some businesses, their COGS are less than 20%, some businesses that it's like 35%. So you have to make adjustments to labor and COGS to make sure it's within that ratio. So we kind of help with that side too. So we'll go in and evaluate it, and we have partners that say, hey, your COGS are high. We have some partners that can help you with that if you want to talk with them.
Right. So if everything goes well and they outsource all their stuff and they're big enough, blah, 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 you can go in and be like, hey, I can add 4-5 percentage points onto your bottom line, take the management of your back office off your hands so you're not dealing with it, and also give you a solution for scaling. Like I can scale that up pretty easily.
So there are some challenges with that because it depends on what they give us, and they have to make the decision on how they want to staff the internal resources.
Right.
So my biggest thing is like, you have to make sure you have, you're measuring everything. So like there are times when people hire us, but what they do is they don't reduce the internal staff. They're able to grow top line. And so it's not always a staff reduction. It's more like, hey, you can also increase your top line, which also happens. So when we implemented it internally, we saw about 30% decrease in cost and 33% increase in revenues, mainly because we're able to hold people accountable. We were able to work people out who were poor performing. It became very clear because before they were using the reasons and excuses of, oh, it wasn't an excuse, it was a reason. They were like, oh, I've got this phone call, I got this other thing, admin thing to handle, I got to call the lab. Now we took all those away. Now all they're doing is just their task of opticianing or teching, or that's pretty much it. We don't have front desk people anymore. The techs sort of receive and opticians check people out. And so that whole position has been somewhere else now. But the faces in the office are, they welcome them and check them out just with other roles. So
yeah, that's pretty amazing. I mean, at a 10 to 15%, at these larger places, if you have 10 to 15% profit, and then you're able to not only increase their top line, you can potentially drop all the savings to their bottom line. And that's a 30% increase in profit potential, or 50% if they're at 10.
And a lot of our practices are looking for expansion, right?
Right.
Because those are the best ones for us. And so they can self-fund more growth versus having to take on debt right now. And they can get debt, but it's going to be expensive.
Yeah. How much of like you're opening a new clinic, obviously you're not outsourcing the building, but like how much of it is going to be staff that's unprofitable for some period of time? Non-doctors.
Depends on your model, how much you want to spend on marketing. There's a lot of different ways. We haven't done too many cold starts Because of this reason, it's better just to buy an existing practice if you're an optometry business, from what I can tell. I'm sure there are situations where cold starts make more sense for us since we're in mature markets already. It made sense to buy existing and just have that customer base or patient base already built in. So your question is how long? Typically 3 years, right? Is typically like any other business. If you're not going to do any advertising dollars, you can expect about 3 years before you really get profitable in the business. Ideally, you can do it in one if you're really aggressive, but yeah, 3 years.
And actually, I should have asked this in the last section on optometry practices, but like, what drives the customer growth? Is it like Google review kind of thing, or just location, or
Healthcare in general is inelastic demand, right? It doesn't matter. Like you're not going to choose not to see 1 year because you can't afford it, unfortunately. So you will get glasses. You may not buy expensive glasses. You might buy even expensive glasses, but you'll need an exam. So there's a lot of inelastic demand in healthcare. So really, it's just what drives it so there's not much sensitivity one way or the other, right? In terms of growth or decrease in business, it's pretty stable. But what drives a lot of the growth, yes, reviews make a big difference. The whole 4.7 to 4.8 is really what you're looking for in a Google review setting. Word of mouth, and quite frankly, location. So most people will not go very far. Within 3 miles of your home is what they'll do. Do you take my insurance? Are you within 3 miles? That's really what most people care about. There's very rare situations where they'll go outside those two criteria.
yeah. It's interesting. I'm doing a home services interview today, and so that's just pure Google reviews, right? I think I'm going to confirm that today. But when you have a location, retail location, then obviously location becomes almost more important, right? And it's a combo of those things. And so I guess citing your practice is really important.
The usual workflow for a new patient is one of two ways. It's like, look at my insurance carrier, who's nearby me, and what are their reviews? And that's when they pick us or someone else. Another review is, oh, I heard about you guys from someone else, and I decided to come in and check you out. That's the other way. Those are the two main ways. And we do occasionally get walk-in traffic because we are retail. It's like, oh, I saw you were here. Let me check out some glasses. Usually, and then those people sometimes we convert into patients and exams, but not always.
Yeah. And when you have a clinic, do you need, or a location, is Google ads and marketing and all that part of the equation? Or is that usually, it's just about,
It is. It's a smaller, I personally don't like to spend a lot of money on marketing. Direct mail works really well. Google ads can work okay with like urgent problems like pink eye. I got something, dry eye, those medical conditions, it could work well. In Atlanta specifically, brand names are really good. So if we carry like Cartier frames, we carry Gucci frames, right? Those type of names, if people are searching that a lot in Atlanta, that's city specific. So you kind of have to understand your local market and what they're searching for. And so, yeah, so that works out well. It can work. It works okay. And you really have someone that knows marketing at this point, right? It's not like the old days of Google ads where you just put some stuff out there and you'll just make money at it. You really have to know what you're doing now.
yeah. And it sounds like you need to know what you're doing at a local level, right? So that's a additional complication. That's interesting. It's always interesting to understand like what is the driver in each business, and like you had retail, you had location, you had this, and like it changes the mix, right? Or selection of glasses, right? It can be important.
I would say the controllable drivers outside of location and what insurances you take is the doctor and then the staff.
Yeah.
And those are the ones, right? And then for the most part, sometimes you can have a really good, unique selection of inventory and make it more high-end and boutique. But across the board, doctor and staff are the two big things that'll make the biggest difference for people leave the doctor. That's the biggest thing that'll cause friction for people. It's like, oh, my doctor's changing. Okay, well, I'm going to try to find someone else now.
Interesting. Okay. Which is why I guess the doctors have more of an ownership model in these bigger places, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. So back to outsourcing. So are you seeing uptake on this kind of service, like pretty strong, or what's the sell like? Is it tough?
It's very easy. Honestly, we've been growing really fast. Well, it's easy for us because one, I know the industry, I know the problems,
Right.
and I can talk to those terms. Two, we're able to solve problems that folks in the industry don't have the background for. Because I have that industrial engineering background, I've worked in larger healthcare systems, manufacturing. There's a lot of problems that have been solved there, like staffing models, like process improvement, that haven't really come to our industry yet. So it's kind of neat taking those tools and applying to our industry and solving the problems. Things like, like, hey, here's one example. So internally in our offices, opticians, if I ask anyone who owns an office, how long does it train someone off the street to become a really high performing optician, hitting the numbers? And most people will say 3 to 6 months, sometimes even longer. We've developed a process that can do it in 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Now, are they as good?
Oh, so you're impacting the doctor or the performer as well as the back office.
Yeah, so those are service. So our whole job is we're a global resourcing company, right? Whether you need people in your office or whether you need people back office, we can help you with both of those solutions. For the in office, it's more consultative and management, helping with the management side of things. With the admin tasks, we can actually take that off your plate. And so what we're selling is not the drill, but the hole, right? The whole analogy. Have you heard that analogy?
Yeah, of course.
Like when people want to go to buy in a hardware store, they don't want a drill, they want a hole, right? And so we're selling the hole.
They actually want a picture hung up on their wall.
Well, that's true. It's fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah.
But they want art in there, right? So you're providing the art. Yeah.
Yes, we're part of the art too. Yes, everything. So, and so that those are little things that have been helpful to solve it. And so because I can talk at that level, and the other thing is some of the stuff that they need requires some heavy analysis. So when they have to give me like, I just did this for a client yesterday. Over the last 3 months, they've had like 35,000 calls and doing a quick analysis and variation analysis and figuring out what the staffing requirements would be on a 55-hour a week schedule. That's a technical like problem that, I used to work on that I'm able to help. So a lot of this is just personal experience that I've had in background. A lot of it is just being in the right place at the right time.
And now are you getting, so I just did a interview with this guy, Michael Greenberg, who's running what he calls digital ops, right? So he's kind of like the technical half of but he's not industry specific, right? And so I'm kind of seeing that as a developing business model, but this one really gets me excited because I'm like, wow, you're taking best practices across industry, delivering. So in some ways, people should pay more for it, right? But now you're giving them a break on what they would have paid. You're helping them scale. I mean, it just feels like, man, this is like, why isn't everyone doing this? Why isn't it done in every industry vertical? So are you also getting into like the automation, like AI side?
Yep.
Or, I call it like light AI, like using it, for like, and you've done, and I know the answer to the question, you've done some stuff around using it with calls and call centers and blah, blah, blah. But talk a little bit about how that's getting incorporated.
AI is a foundation of our business, right? So like in terms of we're gearing towards more being a technology driven with people support type company. So for instance, we just launched an after hours AI bot that we're doing QA testing now on. And so we're using technology to supplement. So when we typically go in and bid on a project, we usually say, here's the service levels that we can hit and how much it's going to cost you to deliver on the quality that you want. But now we're also going to be able to say shortly, we can also handle the overflow calls. And this is what it would look like for that. And it would be AI agent that could do that. And we could set up the routing for that. We use it a lot for training and development. We use it for internal use as well. And then, so one internal use that we've used it for, so I found it really hard to train other people on what a good quality call should be, right? So when you audit the call agents, when they're on the phones, we're doing a lot of manual audits. Our system that we use does an AI screener, but it's not that great. It's just very rudimentary, very basic. So what I found was, since it's so hard to train people on how to do the right quality and getting a team, we would need like 10 people just doing quality call audits. We said, well, why don't we just do this? Let's just take the transcripts, scrub them and send it through HIPAA compliant OpenAI endpoint, send it there, run scores and create a dashboard. So now we have a dashboard of everyone's overall score that's analyzed at a very detailed level. How good was the problem solving? How good was the tone, the messaging? How good was it understood? So like we've replaced our entire quality team with that report. And it's been a game changer for like the level of quality we're able to produce with our remote staff.
And then, so they get back like, here were the issues and you should have said this or that or done this, right? Okay.
Yep. We have that for internal team too, right? So they can record an interaction with either a patient or a practice session. They upload the recording and it breaks it down. It figures out what the recording was about and it says, here's your score. Here's where you could have done better. This is what you could have said instead of what you said here, and working on that. And so that's all automated.
This is incredible. This is like the coolest thing. All right. So like, what are you guys able to measure, like how much better someone gets?
Yeah, it's pretty easy actually. So we've seen about 10 to 20% bump when people start using this. So we've tracked the numbers. We see.
Wow. Okay. And you've already screened out most of the bad people anyway, right? So you're talking about relatively high performers to begin with, and then you're getting another 10, 20% on top of that.
And My biggest thing with operational performance is remove excuses and create transparency.
That sounds like a book right there.
There's one coming out. It'll touch on this for sure. But every morning they bring in their numbers and they talk about reasons and pushbacks that they got, right? And so a lot of times you hear things that are like, okay, well, there's more accountability here. What this allows it to do is shifts it from external circumstances to internal, right? Now they have to submit a recording and get feedback. If they're not getting the feedback and they're not submitting it, they're not doing what it's in their control to try to get better. So we're looking for these behaviors from people internally that they're actually going to take the steps to do what they need to do. And usually what we find is that people do the task, they get better. And if usually what we find is that they don't do the task and we have to work them out of the business because they're not performing and they're not doing the task.
So, and then are you giving them, the other thing I've heard, like Klarna just had this whole thing where they're using, these bots and I guess like they're using them on their website and customers are interacting with the bot. But the other thing you hear is, giving these agents access to internal databases. So I'm sure that's part of your strategy as well.
So from yes, and we haven't really leveraged that one as much yet. We use it more from a training perspective. I'd rather have people, I don't want them looking up information. I want them to know it because the speed of interaction with the patient, you have to know it. You can't take time looking it up. And so we actually use AI in the training side where when we test them and assess them, we actually look for actual understanding and deep knowledge and not just rudimentary surface level knowledge. So if I were to ask you how to lose weight, we're not looking for something like, oh, just reduce calories. We're looking for, hey, first of all, you got to figure out your psychological limitations and where you've had bad patterns of bad behavior and losing weight. Then we're going to create a system around those. Then we're going to create a calorie deficit plan. And then we're going to create an exercise plan. Like that would be a more deep answer, right?
Right.
That includes multiple facets and really understands the problem versus just a rudimentary answer.
And then would you ever have just be a bot do the customer service? Does that not work in your kind of industry?
So the platform we're using, and shout out to them, they are fantastic, called Bland.ai. They're our voice bot, but you can create what they call conversational pathways that you can leverage to be a text bot and a chat bot as well. So you use the same tools and you can use it across platforms. And you only have to program it once and set it up once, and it'll have the same outcomes for every chat channel or every communication channel.
Right. And does that work in your industry to have those, self-serve, or is it really important that they talk to like a person?
For appointments, yes.
Yeah.
Now, there are certain scenarios perfect example in our after hours voice bot, it actually asks you specific questions. There are certain things that if you call about that if you don't go to the doctor within about 4 to 8 hours, you could lose your vision. And so those are really critical things that we need to catch. And so it catches that and transfers you directly to an emergency number. Outside of that, if you want to make an appointment, it can do that. If you have questions about, do we take this insurance or not? There's a date that it does that. What are hours of operation? If there's something else, it takes the message and the staff gets back to them. But there are there's only so many cases that people will call about. And either we have that information and can answer it dynamically during the call, or we can't.
Now, with these taking the conversation and then rating it, all that, is that something you built yourself? Was that built on Bland? Terrible name, by the way.
No, that's something we built ourselves. What I did is I took some of the knowledge and inside of how to do a good prompt. We have an open AI endpoint. And then we hired someone off of Fiverr and said, this is what I wanted to do. Let me help you work with it and get through some technical challenges. There were a bunch of technical challenges that we had to overcome.
Yeah, I remember you doing this.
But then we worked through that together and launched it.
Okay. And then do you worry? So one of the things I've seen is just like the tech moves so fast that like you build something and then like 2 days later it's completely obsolete because some other tool does it. I mean, has that been a factor for you at this point?
Not yet.
Okay.
In fact, I hope that happens because it brings more stability in. And I will say that the voice bot, Bland.ai, they do a really good job from an infrastructure standpoint. Like they're one of the ones that I could see winning out this whole, like, who are the players with the bot infrastructure? To me, they're like an all-in encompassing solution, and they're scaling and growing really fast. And so that's why we chose them as our platform, because of the level of support and how much they're putting in the infrastructure, and they're really aggressive about growing it. So
yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, they are doing a lot.
Yeah, I look at Poe, I can't remember the name of the company behind Poe, but they just did a thing where they've got a bot, right? They got a chat bot, but now it accesses every other chat bot. And so you can actually call chat bots in. You can call a model in, right? So it's like, hey,
yeah,
I like Claude for writing. So now I can call Claude in, but ChatGPT is better at coding, right?
Like GPTs and assistants. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So that like at some point there will be a couple of people who win that.
Yeah.
But actually, anyway, so we're way down we don't need to talk about AI here. That's not the point. But the point is that you're starting to build, like, you're a digital apps company, right? In that definition. But what I see here is like the industry specific nature of it is what I find so exciting about it, because you can really, it's almost like an operations company in a box. And there's just no way that even some of your mid-sized customers, maybe your largest customers, can internally do this, but like people just can't keep up with this technology. They don't have the tech resources. They can't do the recruiting. They can't, there are complications in hiring people in other countries. And then just this idea about constantly keeping on top of the processes and making them efficient in the back office, it just seems like a no-brainer. And with the technology now, I feel like if you don't adopt something like this and your competitors do, all of a sudden, your competitor can, one, probably pay their best people onshore who work for them more. They could still make more profit while they do that. And, attract your people, by the way, and invest in other stuff to grow the business, more marketing or whatever the driver is. They can do that all at the same time, maybe even cut their prices because of this. They can do all those things at the same time. They just crush you, right? So I think it's absolutely urgent that, well, first of all, if I was starting a business today, 100%, I think if you're starting from scratch, knowing an industry or getting someone who really knows an industry and building this kind of digital ops BPO thing for a vertical is like a no-brainer to me. They just don't exist.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, do you have any competitors yet?
Not specifically as a BPO. No, there's a lot of VA companies and people in the marketplace confuse the two, but I have to kind of educate them like, no, we are different. You'll feel the difference.
This is blue ocean. I mean, VA is red ocean. I think this is where it's got to go, but it's a lot harder. I mean, you're integrating technology. You've really got to have a mind. I mean, you're a great consultant on process, right? And you've got to have that, right? And so you got to bring together all the offshoring with the process, with the continuous improvement, with the technology, with the industry specific knowledge. And it's a pretty powerful, but the model becomes like a managed service. It's almost, plus you can take costs out as you go, right?
Yeah.
And charge based on value, and your margin just goes up and up and up. So over time, as you learn.
Exactly. And, I know what their model is. I know their numbers probably better than some of them do. So I know how much I can charge relative to what we're delivering on. So it's a relatively easy sales cycle for me. Now, what I will say is, even though we talk about technology a lot, I can tell you it is who first every single time,
Of course.
whether it's in office or out of office. And there's a whole process we use to kind of vet through that. It is definitely, I would say, even though we are really focused on technology, we're really good at learning and doing that. I think the who made such a big difference for us.
Right. But I'm already saying, like, your who got 20% better by applying this technology.
Exactly.
So now you're 20% better than any of your competitors are going to be on call taking, right? And that's just the beginning. I mean, the tech's growing. So like I really see the tech turning the who into 50, 100% better over time, right? It'll get more and more granular. It'll learn better. It'll be like, oh, you shouldn't have this kind of person. You should have that kind of person. So then you start seeing this incredible leverage, and, it's going to be a cycle and you're going to have to stay on top of it. But that's how I see it. It's the technology enables the person.
Yeah.
It's always been true, right? I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, I love this. It's an incredible model. So I'm like, I got to go do this, but it's not my business.
It's a lot of fun.
But other people should be thinking about it. I mean, particularly if you have operational experience in a vertical, I mean, this is a no-brainer. It just feels, and now there's services like this guy I've had on the pod. He's big on X, John Matzner. He started like an all-you-can-eat offshore staffing model with a lot of internal kind of processes for how to use people, how to recruit them, a community, and now you can white label that, right? So I pay 10, 15 grand a year, whatever it is. I can recruit X number of people. He handles identifying people. You build the systems based on your knowledge of the industry. You got to get the tech component, but some of that you can get overseas. That's going to be the hardest piece. But, you can white label yourself a business with very few actual dedicated employees, right? And the building blocks of this are going to get easier and easier, I think, as we go forward, right?
Yeah, the way I look at it too is if it's easy for me to get into, it's easy for someone else to get into. So I have to kind of figure out where are my defensible positions in the marketplace.
Well, industry knowledge. I mean, that's what John's like, I can build this platform,
Yeah,
but I can't go sell it to GovCon and Optometry and blah, blah, blah,
exactly. Yeah.
because I don't know this industry.
That seems like a great tool to have as something in your arsenal. I would think that, if I were to use his services, I'd also want to pair it with something else that would make me a little bit more different than someone else doing recruiting in the same industry. But that's actually really good.
Yeah. I actually look at what he's doing as like, it's a really good stepping stone to get started,
Fair enough. Yeah.
right? Like, I have industry knowledge, but I don't know how to go recruit people in the Philippines or LATAM or whatever.
Yeah. That's a hard problem to solve. Yeah.
So I'm going to use that, right? And then like I can do it, I'll learn it myself over time, but 3 years down the road, I can specialize in finding, if that makes sense, I can specialize in finding talent in Panama that other people can't find or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But I really think the ultimate advantage in the end is going to be industry vertical knowledge. So not only are you started with knowledge, right? But every day you operate this business, you get more knowledge about what everybody's doing and how it works, right? So then I go to another competitor, they might, if they haven't done the same number of cycles, they haven't put in the same technology, you're just always going to stay ahead of them. But, as long as you keep doing that, right? You keep learning and keep getting the next level of, and of course, then the market will specialize. It'll be like, well, this is really good for 2-person practices, and this is what's really good for scale, and blah, blah, blah. So it's really exciting, though. I think it's pretty phenomenal business model. I love it.
It's a lot of fun. So, yeah.
Cool. All right. So that we went a little over because I got so excited about your business model. But as part of some of your recruiting, and, we're in an EO chapter together, you brought out some stuff that I thought was sort of groundbreaking. I had never heard before. It's actually pretty old stuff. But a guy named Tom Foster, it was him surfacing information from, was it Elliot Jacques from,
Jacques or Jacques. I think Jacques or Jacques. I don't forget. Yeah. He's like a 1950s, 1960s type research. Yeah.
interestingly, the guy who came up with the midlife crisis term and the first person to use the corporate culture term. So this guy's like all over the place, and I never heard of him. But he developed these ideas around time span and strata. So why don't you talk a little bit about those concepts and help people understand what they mean?
Yeah. Tom Foster is basically, like you said, a consultant who kind of rehashes work and does consulting work around there. And he has a great YouTube series on this on YouTube. But so the way that Elia Jacques frames what he calls strata, there's numbers, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever he goes to. I think for business, up to 5 is really relevant. And each strata refers to how far you can work into the future in a particular role without having to gain support or get help. And so typically it can be, I think strata 1 is 0 to 90 days, strata 2 is 90 to a year, 3 is like a year to a couple of years, 4 I think is like up to 5 years, and 5 is like 10 years out. And there's different skill sets required at each strata. And what he does is Tom's videos and his process kind of go into, well, how do you actually break down a task and what strata are all these tasks? And then when you have that, you can actually create interview questions around it. You can create specifications and expectations around that. And it gets way more insightful into someone's background. So I'll use a good example. So I was hiring a head of operations for the BPO business. And when I was doing the interview questions, one of the biggest things I needed someone to do is create systems and processes and set direction. So I'm the one setting 5-year, 10-year direction. And I'll set the 1-year goal I just need someone who can know how to get to, okay, well, what do I need to do this year to get to my 3-year goal? And so what that means is that when I ask the question, hey, when did you have experience around setting direction for your organization? I'm looking for the time frame that they used. So I had several candidates that said, well, I set weekly goals and monthly goals for my organization. I was like, did you do anything past that? Like, no. Okay. Even though you technically have that capability, you did not do it in the same time horizon that I would ask you to do it in, which means that they don't have the requisite potential requisite experience to meet the expectations I would have for them. And so that was really insightful because there was a lot of candidates that showed up as potential who fell off really quickly once we asked those questions. Really realized that, oh, you know what? They may have looked good on paper. They passed all of our tests. They just didn't, they really don't have that level of experience that I thought they might have had. So it kind of susses out like their actual ability versus what they stated ability is relative to the role that they're doing.
Yeah, what I loved is sort of like I think where it started was Elliot Jacques was brought into a steel manufacturer in England in the 50s or 60s or something. And one of the line workers asked why they made hourly wages and the managers got paid a salary. And he's like, I don't know. So he went and thought about it and studied it. And what he realized is like the production worker on the floor is doing something immediate and then getting tasked with something else. And so like their actual time span of activity was like hourly, right? It was like every hour they were told to do something and did it. And so like that's why they got paid hourly. Whereas the managers, so I think at like Strata One, he calls that production, right? Where someone, and if it's like, I don't know, if you're an accountant, it's like they're doing the bookkeeping, the basic stuff, right? And then there's somebody at Strata Two, they manage production. So they need to look a little bit farther out. So they need to look at what's happening over the week or the month. And then you got somebody at 3, I believe, was they have to coordinate a system. So that might be one system, right? Like finance. So your finance director has to be a Strata 3 because they've got to understand production and the people managing production and then create a system so that they can do that better and coordinate it with other people. And then like Strata 4 was like managing multiple systems. So now I'm a COO and I'm bringing together finance, operations, and sales. And then I think Strata 5 was what you were talking about, which is, I'm the CEO. So I'm like looking at the market 5 years, 10 years out and trying to understand where it's going. And at each point, that's a longer time span that you're working. And what I found really compelling for me was when I was having trouble in my company and we would have breakdowns. The reason he used strata is because like strata, like if you look at it in a Grand Canyon or something, you have strata of rock, right, of different deposits. And what happens when a rock at level 1 falls apart? All the other levels collapse down to that. And I thought it was really crucial because like I would have things where like someone would screw something up and then all of a sudden everybody at a higher level had to move down and do the job of the person below them to cover. Right. So things aren't going well with a client. The project manager screws it up. Then their supervisor is like an account manager or whatever, screws it up. Well, next thing you know, the CEO's in there trying to fix it. And so the CEO is working on a time span that's not appropriate for him or her. Right. And that was sort of like the really compelling piece of it that I felt. And like I felt that. Right. I've seen that happen. And so to your point, you can develop interview questions and assessment methodology around that, right? And you actually used Chat GPT, didn't you, to like kind of build it?
Yeah, you can create a ChatGPT process to analyze a resume and score it based off of what the stratas for the roles and deliverables would be. Yeah, ChatGPT creates it, the deliverables and the time horizons, and then it scores it based off the resume. And then we also created a bot that actually reaches out to them and asks them clarifying questions and changes their score.
Wow. The other thing I thought was really interesting about it was, to your point, how many people come in with X experience and how many people can do the job at the next level is, and I don't know where he developed these stats, but he was basically like 40% of the population or 80% of the population can do Strata 1 work, something like that. And like that same equivalent could do Strata 2, that could manage production. But once you got to Strata 3, like build a system, it was like 8% of the population. And then you get up to Strata 5, and it's like 0.04% can ever do that. And so what I thought was really important is like understanding people have limitations. And the reason why somebody, when they get promoted and they can't perform, I mean, obviously there's learning and training. And so, immediate performance isn't supposed to be perfect. But if they're a year or two in and they can't perform at that next level, they're just not capable of moving up strata. And so they're operating in a different world than they used to and on a different time frame, and they're not capable of it. And you just have to realize how narrow the pyramid is going up.
And, I'm familiar with that research. I don't know how true that is because I'm experimenting with some things that I think there might be hope that it might be higher than it actually is, right? So I'm investigating a lot around learning theory and how people process information. And actually, there's a thing called Bloom's taxonomy. Basically, the strata 3 and strata 4 folks seem to have an intuitive knowledge of how things fit together and they understand conceptually what's going on. And so if you can train that, can you really move people from 1, 2 to at least a serviceable 3 or 4, right? They may not be like super high performing because it doesn't come naturally to them, but is there skills that you can develop to do that? I think there might be. I think it's more about how people process information and learn and that whole growth mindset type mentality. I don't think it's as low as it. I don't think, is it going to be 100%? Probably not. But I do think that there's opportunity. So I'm experimenting with that right now, actually, with our teams to see how that works.
Interesting. And what was the training concept that you mentioned?
So it's called Bloom's taxonomy.
Oh, wow.
It basically just shows you how well you know something. So at the very top level is what they call create, right? And that's like PhD level, like really you're creating brand new stuff out of nowhere. But the levels right below it are really sufficient to really have a good understanding of how do things connect together. So if we use our example, I'll use an example in our offices. So if someone calls and says, "Hey, I'm having trouble with my eyes." I'll say, "Great. What are you experiencing?" "Well, it just seems like my vision's a little blurry." I was like, "Okay, well, what does that mean? Is it just prescription needs to be updated or do you have cancer?" Right? So it could be anything in between there. And so at learning what questions to ask, the person has to know what questions to ask to know if that could even be that, right? Normally, if someone who's just basically trained, they'd be like, "Okay, let's just get you in for an exam. We have something available next week. Does that work for you?" When in reality, it might be something more urgent. So someone who really has a higher level of understanding will ask, is this new? How long have you been experiencing this? Are you feeling pain? Have you been seeing flashes and floaters that are recent within the last 3 weeks? So they'll ask questions like that get into a deeper knowledge of, is this actually really a problem? And so you can train that, right? You're going to train and test them. It's hard. People don't usually do it because it takes a lot of work to get to that point. But I've seen improvement in people's knowledge and structures to be able to process and think through things a little bit better that way.
That's fascinating. That's a whole nother podcast, by the way. What do you think? Do you think AI technology, because there is some evidence, Ethan Mollick at Wharton has done some rudimentary studies where they can take, this is a BCG, Harvard kind of thing, so Boston Consulting Group. So this is a very high performing group to begin with, but they did show that people who were ranked lowest within that very high performing group benefited the most from using LLMs as part of their work. Do you think that's part of this, is like you can build these processes and training and then have these assistants essentially through the AI to help?
You still have to have a core understanding of what you're asking the assistants to do. So I think that people who have enough cursory knowledge to understand concepts but don't know implementation, LLMs work the best because you know what to ask it. But you don't know, if you had to create it from scratch, you wouldn't know how to do it as effectively, or there's gaps in their ability.
Right. But you could build, like, to your point, you could build in like process or like a prompt chain that's like, all right, I'm trying to build a system, so here's what I need to do, right? And you could build some of that in to help the person, then source the information.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, I think you could probably use it to do some of the management work, like especially middle management work too.
Yeah.
That needs to be done for like tracking and things like that. But that's maybe a different conversation. But yeah, I think short answer is yes. I think it helps, but you have to know what to ask it to help.
Right. All right, Ankit. Well, we are at time, unfortunately. I think we need another podcast on training and AI methods. And I'm really interested in this. I mean, if you can see demonstrable performance increases through some of this stuff, I mean, that's a big deal. I've seen training work, but not move people up multiple level kind of things. So anyway, we will talk about that next. But for now, thank you for being on the pod. It was awesome. And God, there's so much content here. This is probably one of our richest, deepest pods we've done yet. So appreciate it.
Thanks, Alan, for having me. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Small Business Mentor podcast, brought to you by Alan Pentz. For more insights on how to navigate your business through its black holes, visit @apentz on X. Don't forget to search for Small Business Mentor in your podcast app to subscribe. Thank you for joining us, and here's to your next leap in business growth.